Welcome to episode 6 of Choose Wisely. In the last episode, we traveled back through Mass Effect 2 and uncovered compelling information that led us to a very important conclusion. As was discovered with Mass Effect 3, evidence uncovered throughout our journey points to Mass Effect 2 also being entirely within Shepard's mind. We don't expect you to take any of our discoveries as facts. We are just taking you along the same journey we took, using the narrative and exposition the game presents to us as a guide. Take from it what you will. What the Mass Effect 2 story, and by extension BioWare, told was that things were going to be different here. No more cooldown weapons, no more Mako, no more pure exploration, but the Terminus systems were suddenly opened up, retroactively populated with familiar faces, and seemingly familiar places. The altering of the Mass Effect universe lore was not subtle. It was like being hit with a brick, but the deep narrative between Shepard and the mix of old and new crew did a reasonable job of distracting us from how broken and disconnected the overall story felt.
Sooner or later, you're both gonna have to stop fighting this war, or we'll all end up paying for it.
We talked briefly about bringing down the sky and Pinnacle Station in Part 1. Now we'll just reiterate a few key points. If you don't own, or own but do not play these DLCs, the events never happen. In the case of owning but not playing Bringing Down the Sky, Balak will still make an appearance in Mass Effect 3, but he never drove an asteroid into Terra Nova. In the case of Pinnacle Station, if you completed the DLC in Mass Effect 1, Shepard's apartment on Entice may as well not exist, as it is never referenced nor accessible following the first game. As you may have noticed in the preceding scene, during Sovereign and the Geth's entrance into Widow, the ships don't seem to be using the relay. The Mass Effect 1 Codex entry on the Quarian flotilla states that it takes days for them to navigate through a gate. Granted, the flotilla is comprised of 50,000 ships. We only see Sovereign and a few dozen Geth ships come through the Widow relay, but how many ships can actually use a mass relay simultaneously? Let's review the Codex entry on mass relay technology.
Structures scattered throughout the stars and can create corridors of virtually mass-free space, allowing instantaneous transit between locations separated by years or even centuries of travel using conventional FTL drives.
The Arcturus Prime relay is in range. Initiating transmission sequence. We are connected. Calculating transit mass and destination. The relay is hot, acquiring approach vector. The board is green. Approach run has begun. Hitting the relay in 3, 2, 1.
Based on the Mass Effect 1 Codex explanation and the lore established by the in-game narrative in Mass Effect 1, we conceive that this kind of mass maneuvering through a relay would be highly dangerous, if even possible. It may be easy to handwave the event as dramatic effect, and it sure is executed well, but there has to be limitations. We are never told how many mass-free corridors a relay can produce simultaneously, nor how large a given corridor can be, and if said corridor can accommodate more than one ship at a time. But we can make assumptions based on what we garner from the game narrative. Before a ship can take a relay, the pilot needs to initiate communication and wait for a connection, transmit the vessel's mass and destination to the relay, acquire the approach vector from the relay, and then move into the approach corridor. Every ship that plans to take a trip across the galaxy needs to follow these steps. Can relays provide multiple approach vectors? Can they handle multiple ship masses as a single number, or does it form a queue? Is a corridor big enough for a dozen ships? 1,000? How does it deal with the exit vectors of multiple ships? Would exit drift be problematic, possibly resulting in collisions if too many ships are traveling together? These visuals, when held up against the Mass Effect 1 Codex and Joker's ship-wide relay approach monologue, call this entire scenario into question.
I hate that guy.
Before we continue on to the battle for the Citadel, we should take a look at the Epilogue. which contains one of the biggest points of contention among the player base regarding impact, or lack thereof, of our choices. First of all, the notion that a newcomer human would be allowed to circumvent the galactic political process, regardless of Spectre and hero status, is pure fantasy. The groundwork of the story indicates the Alliance would supply candidates and the Council would vote on whom to appoint. Shepard's voice may have some weight behind the process, but the ultimate decision would have been left up to the Council vote. Given what takes place leading up to this scene, it is unlikely that Anderson or Udina would be considered, let alone chosen for the position.
Send your fleet in.
This meeting would be more
Being led to believe that we have this power was pretty sly.
My advisor is unavailable. Counselor Udina isn't available.
Touting that choices matter and then rendering them meaningless later down the road is a hard lesson we as the player must face. In both Mass Effect 2 and 3, we face such disappointments on an ever-progressive scale. This is troubling from a suspension of disbelief standpoint, but it's also a significant clue as to what's going on in the Mass Effect universe. Over time, faced with the same shattering of hopes over and over again, we begin to lower our expectations and relent to the fact that we no longer have as much control over the story as we used to.
This isn't your fight any longer, Shepard.
Are you starting to see the pattern? Did we ever really have control at all? We're dealing with an illusion of choice, one that the player can revisit over and over again through reloads, replays, and a new game plus. In the end, however, like in a recurring dream, nothing really changes. Ultimately, the core state of what Shepard perceives as reality is never altered. The Normandy is a frigate. It is a relatively small ship with a small crew complement and likely has enough firepower to deal with other ships in its class. However, in the cutscene that plays after Sovereign's avatar is destroyed, it would seem that the Normandy has far more firepower than the cruisers and dreadnoughts we see in the fight against Sovereign. As Sovereign begins to fall away from the Citadel, the ships in the fleet are ordered to focus their fire on the Reaper, which they appear to do. However, none of the shots are shown to make contact or have any significant impact. The camera focuses on Joker and the Normandy, and after a backflip, the frigate swoops in and fires a single shot at the Reaper. Only this single shot by the Normandy is shown to connect with Sovereign. The blast from the Normandy punches a hole clean through the Reaper and the massive dreadnought subsequently explodes. The killing blow originates from the Normandy? This is great for dramatic effect and the feeling of victory it gave us, as well as the classic video game end boss moment, but it appears that without barriers, Reapers are made of tinfoil. The short-circuiting of Sovereign's systems was a great loophole to weaken this seemingly indestructible force, but even without its barrier, shouldn't this Reaper have put up a much longer and harder fight? It is the largest, most heavily armored dreadnought the galaxy has ever seen, after all. And the killing blow comes from our little ship? Really? It was too easy. The Mako arrives onto the Citadel in pretty spectacular fashion, but did it bother anyone that the vehicle popped out of the massless relay corridor, moving sideways? Based on what we know, the vehicle should have shifted out of the corridor into the visible spectrum of light, traveling in line with the relay arms. Of course, if it had exited as expected, it would have hit the lake like a missile. The massless corridor created by the relay connection would have also compromised the Citadel, and the Mako would have punched holes into the far outer ring, center dais, and the ceiling behind the fake clouds that hung above the relay monument arms, if it even survived long enough to get that far. Of course, there should have been some damage there already from Saren's journey, and he and his Geth didn't even have a transport. Furthermore, based on the relay usage information in the Codex and Joker's monologue, a connection to the relay would need to be established, and the mass of the ship, or the Mako in this case, would have had to have entered the relay prior to travel. Maybe Shepard just did that off camera with their Omni tool. This would also have been the case for Saren. Of course, since he didn't have a transport vehicle, he would only need to program in his own weight and that of the few Geth traveling with him. That must have been a fun ride, free-floating in a weightless corridor, flailing all around at ludicrous speed, exiting onto the Citadel at a few thousand kilometers per hour. Yeah, that could happen. Because Saren was the first to use the relay, prep for the journey would require the relay here on Ilos to align itself with the monument on the Citadel. Based on what we know of how relays work in the Mass Effect universe, this would position the forks of the two relays so they were pointing directly at each other. There is a significant compounded problem with this process when it comes to the Ilos and Citadel relays. Relays out in space are free-floating. Some may be tied to their positions at a subatomic level, but they can move when necessary to maintain their intended connections and to compensate for celestial movement over millions and perhaps even billions of years. The Ilos and Citadel relays can't possibly do this. Remember, based on what we are told by Vigil, these two relays connect only to each other. They do not connect to the greater relay system. They also do not have any visible range of motion because they are not free-floating. Even if they were able to move for alignment, both relays are subject to the rotation of Ilos and the Citadel. Theoretically, it could take millions of years, if ever, before the two relays were aligned to create a viable corridor. Even if the relays did align, there is yet another serious problem: the site-to-site trajectory right through the inner depths of the galactic core. So what does this tell us? The trip from Ilos to the Citadel is simply impossible, not only for Saren and Shepard, but for the Prothean scientists that apparently used it to reprogram the Keepers as well. With that revelation comes the realization that the whole premise behind Sovereign and Saren seeking the conduit to fix what the Protheans broke by altering the Keeper's signal and allowing the return of the Reapers is rendered false. So if the cycle is indeed broken and the Reaper harvest was delayed, what is the real cause behind the failure of the cycle? If this conduit we are presented with on Ilos is part of Shepard's hallucination, it begs the question, what is the real conduit Saren and Sovereign are looking for, and what is its purpose? Of course, it also begs the question, where in Mass Effect 1 did it all go wrong? Where does the rabbit hole begin?
The beacon has brought us one step closer to finding the conduit.
What did we learn while chasing Saren on Ilos? If you recall, Vigil delayed us for some time while it gave us a pep talk on learning what not to do when fighting the Reapers. This is important to remember, because Vigil didn't actually give us that information during our chat. At the end of this delay, Vigil tells us that Saren has not yet reached the conduit. How is that possible? If we choose not to entertain the Geth posted along our path, it takes less than 3 minutes to get to the relay. With the head start Saren had, combined with our extensive delay by the VI, Saren had more than enough time to get to the Citadel, stop off at Flux for some gambling and a few drinks, and then head up to the tower. So are we trapped on Ilos? Is the VI holding Shepard and Squad hostage? Is this when things start to go wrong? Now that we know Vigil is not to be trusted, let's take a closer look at our surroundings. Let's look at this bunker first. It's supposed to be an underground facility filled with life pods, and is presumably protected from the elements and detection. Well, despite traveling down during much of our journey to where we find Vigil, we aren't actually getting deeper beneath the surface of the planet. At a few of the areas that are followed by long gradual slopes, there are life pod rooms that are open to the sky. To make matters worse, a few hundred feet from where we meet Vigil, the ceiling opens to the sky completely. Why was this not picked up by the Normandy? As we saw when we arrived at the site of the relay, it was not shrouded in any way. It would have been easily spotted via orbital scans. In fact, with all the buildings visible here, it looks to be part of a metropolis, not a hidden site or secure underground facility. If this place was created by the same aliens that built the bunker on Mars, why was it in such poor condition? Let's take a look at the planetary data on Ilos and see if there are any clues there. Based on the atmospheric pressure of Ilos alone, what we see happen on the surface is impossible. We can't speak for the alien species of the game, but we can look at how it affects humans. At 11 atmospheres, all breathable gases, save for helium, neon, and hydrogen, would be toxic or narcotic to some degree, especially nitrogen and oxygen, the two main components of air. Narcosis produces a state similar to drunkenness, or nitrous oxide inhalation. With the stated high oxygen levels on Ilos, this problem is compounded, as oxygen toxicity becomes fatal rather quickly. Of course, none of this would matter considering the pressure alone would kill a human almost instantly. It wouldn't just cause suffocation, it would implode lungs. Walking the surface of Ilos would be like diving 330 feet under sea level here on Earth. Without suit protection and heavy use of Mass Effect fields to lessen the pressure, this would be a very short and painful experience. Without a full environmental suit, it would crush all but the most resilient sapient species living in the Mass Effect universe. Even the L-Core would find it difficult to manage here. So Ilos is out as far as reality is concerned. Did we crash during the Mako drop? Did Joker fail in his attempt to get us safely on the ground? It's possible, but we'd have two problems with that scenario. The planet data is available before the mission. It is also unnecessary for the Normandy to dive bomb drop the Mako, given it could have just flown to the drop point and hovered there while Shep and Squad hopped the Mako out of the cargo bay with thrusters.
Why did you bring me here?
Before we move on, we want to go back to Vigil for a moment. It seemed to want to tell us something besides all the lies. First, you need to know our mistakes so you do not repeat them. Vigil wanted to tell us a story so we wouldn't make the same mistakes the Protheans had during their encounter with the Reapers. It didn't really provide us with much during the conversation, so did the story actually follow our interactions with this mysterious VI, starting with the background of the Prothean scientists and ending with the tricolored space magic and the original, puzzling epilogue of Mass Effect 3? Staying planted in the narrative and not lamenting that the writers messed up on the planetary data for Ilos, there is enough evidence to suggest that this planet is part of the illusion. Let's head back to the Citadel and see if we can find anything out of the ordinary there.
Forwarded the mission update to the Citadel, Commander. We got confirmation on those reinforcements.
After being ordered back to the Citadel and being blocked from further action by the Council, Shepard has no choice but to steal the Normandy in order to chase Saren to Ilos. Part of the escape from lockdown involves Anderson aiding the cause by overriding the lockdown orders. The first problem with this scenario is choice. Why would it be up to Shepard to decide how Anderson accomplishes this task? Why would someone with such a distinguished career look to Shepard to decide their fate? This seems to be drama for the sake of drama.
It's your call, Captain.
Regardless of what we choose Anderson's fate to be, when Shepard and Squad return to the docks, we find them unguarded. There is no C-Sec presence, and the Alliance Marine stationed at the airlock to Normandy is gone. And this is before Anderson cancels the lockdown. If we choose to have Anderson unlock the ship via Citadel control, he shows up at a random dock and accesses a console towards the end of the platform. Isn't this Citadel control? In this scenario, the outcome is Anderson getting shot. However, there are no repercussions from this seeming disastrous turn of events. Anderson is alive and well after Sovereign is destroyed, and even shows up unhurt with C-Sec as part of the rescue team. Anderson's actions were treasonous. Shouldn't he be in the C-Sec holding cell, or at the very least under guard in C-Sec infirmary? Anderson taking a bullet is never brought up again. There are no consequences of choice here, for Shepard or Anderson. We love to hate him, but should we? Let's take a good long look at what Udina really is to Shepard versus what we as players may have perceived him to be over the course of the game.
Well, what about Shepard? She's a spacer, lived aboard starships most of her life.
Humanity was well aware of the risks when you went into the Traverse.
What about Saren? You can't just ignore a rogue Spectre. I demand action!
Any idea where we could find him?
I have a contact in C-Sec who can help us track Garrus down.
I'll take care of Saren. You take care of the political fallout.
Not exactly the answer I was looking for, Shepard.
I tried to warn you about Saren and you refused to face the truth.
The Council has stripped him of his position.
That is not good enough. You know he's hiding somewhere in the Traverse. Send your fleet in! We have one more lead. Matriarch Benezia, the other voice in that recording. She has a daughter, a scientist who specializes in the Protheans.
Every time humanity asks for help, you ignore us.
Shepard's right. I'm sick of this council and its anti-human bull. We've got a lot of work to do, Shepard. You're going to need a ship, a crew, supplies.
Based on our interactions with Udina and the Council, his last action in the Council chambers is actually completely out of character. He may be an ass, but he's not a turncoat. Not once did he ever back the Council over Shepard. He may have been a pain to deal with on occasion. He's a politician after all. Paying close attention to his dialogue, it's quite easy to see that he was always on Shepard's side.
I apologize, Commander.
Remember, Udina was 1/3 of the reason Shepard was considered for the mission to Eden Prime. In fact, it was Udina who recommended the commander as a candidate in the first place.
Shepard? Earthborn, but no record of his family.
To be shut down by the Council when this close to catching Saren seems rather contrived, especially when it involved one of our best political allies turning against us in the 11th hour. However, Udina is so well written, many of us probably never questioned his betrayal. Some of us may have even told ourselves we expected it.
What do you expect from a politician?
Udina is not the only one that suddenly jumps out of character. The Council may have seemed difficult during our interaction with them at the beginning of the game, but after making Shepard a Spectre, they were quite helpful. They also constantly reiterated that they choose not to get involved with Spectre activities. They just wanted to make sure Shepard was provided with whatever information they had available.
The Council prefers not to become involved in the specifics of Spectre activities. We only want you to be aware of all your options.
This stance is reiterated at least twice by the Council, and even if it sounded like doublespeak or blowing smoke, it may have been quite literal. The Council appoints Spectres and sends them on their way to protect the galaxy. They don't order them around or place limitations on them. Unless one becomes the very threat to the galaxy the Council is trying to protect, they are free to do as they please. And based on Saren's actions and revelations, it is also highly unlikely that Spectres filed reports either. It would be quite difficult to maintain plausible deniability while in possession of a paper trail. So why is Shepard suddenly faced with this reversal of position the Council usually takes in regards to Spectre activities? Why would they choose to shut down any efforts of a Spectre trying to protect the galaxy? Furthermore, why did the Council look to Udina to assist them in shutting down Shepard when they alone were the only authority in the matter?
A Spectre can't answer to anyone but the Council.
He was also not in a position to ground the Normandy either. It was still under the jurisdiction of the Citadel Council, to be used at their and Shepard's discretion. This scene goes so far as to counter the functions and authority of the Council established by the narrative earlier in the game.
You're a Spectre now. You don't answer to us.
Let's head back to Normandy, to just after the escape from Virmire. Maybe the Salarians know what's going on. Two significant things happen right after returning from Virmire. One of them, speaking with the Salarians, is optional. We'll start with the one that is not, the meld with Liara. After dealing with Virmire, Liara suggests a melding to decipher the remainder of the beacon information. Shepard cannot refuse the meld. It's plot important. This meld provides the information that reveals Ilos as the possible location of the conduit. We already know Ilos is fully immersed in the illusion. So is this where it starts? Are we trapped in the meld? Is Liara a doomsday device? Did Shepard's brain finally give out to the stress of beacon visions? Are they a jabbering mess like Manuel on Eden Prime, broken and beaten? It could be possible. All Shepards are wearing the same clothing here, something dark blue that could look like crumpled metal in the right light. The problem with this scenario, however, is it doesn't explain the breath scene. By now, most of the player base has either chatted with the STG team themselves or watched it on YouTube. Did you chat with Kirihei after Virmire? He and crew were placed down in the cargo hold out of the way, so there is potential to miss this diversion. Talking to Kirihei gives us the opportunity to question him about the loss of Kaidan or Ashley. If they happen to be on the Salarian team during the mission, this conversation is much more interesting. If we chose to save the squad member at the bomb, how is it that the squad member with Kirihei's team dies, and yet the Salarians take only 2 casualties? And how did any of them escape from the anti-aircraft tower if they were still pinned seconds before the Normandy returned to the bomb site? If we attempt to save the squad mate we sent with the STG team and pay attention during the fight, we find them alone on the anti-aircraft tower. Not one of the Salarian operatives is with them. If the developers went to enough trouble to put Ashley here, why not a few of the Salarians? Did Kirihei send our crew member to the anti-aircraft tower alone to die? Didn't sound that way when hearing Ash over the comm. Furthermore, saving Ash instead of Kaidan does not affect the Salarian casualties. they still lose 2 regardless of whom we choose to save. Our choice on Virmire isn't actually who we save, but who we choose to let die. Shepard is not psychic, but even their dialogue expresses that the outcome here is fixed.
Fight hard, Chief. Die proud.
Aye, aye, Commander.
On a final note, if Shepard renegades Kirihei on the subject of the squadmate's death, they do something fascinating. We thought this was perhaps the first fourth wall break of this type in Mass Effect 1, buried within a conversation that some of us may never have. And with Shepard's acknowledgement of the player here, it stood to reason we were already within the illusion. However, it seems only the female Shepards do this. Because this was limited to FemShep, we had to rule it out as a fourth wall break, but it was enough to get us looking closer at the narrative and Shepard's behavior. And sure enough, we found one.
Saren's locked the elevator. Suit up! We're going outside!
Nobody is messing with my head anymore.
So what is the significance of these 2 events? Both are an example of railroading, which signals the beginning of the end of our journey, where choice and free will are replaced by predestination.
So what are we supposed to do now?
It's time to head back to Virmire for some sand and sun, and maybe some answers. Virmire culminates to our first face-to-face interaction with the former Thorian Spectre. The previous 2 times we encounter him is via the holographic projection at the Citadel and from 2 cinematic storytelling points of view during the events at Eden Prime. The problem? During the conversation with Saren at the end of the game, he reveals he was altered to strengthen his resolve, as a reaction to Shepard's persuasion during the conversation here on Virmire. However, in both this scene and the storytelling perspective on Eden Prime, Saren is already altered. He already has the glowing metal jaw and glowing eyes, what looks like a Geth arm, and tubes running everywhere. So is the Saren we see on Virmire real? It is very possible that he is not, for a minimum of 2 reasons. During the fight, he is protected by plot armor. This is the first time the narrative has us fight an enemy that cannot be killed or otherwise defeated, regardless of our actions. Saren also uses biotics during this fight, albeit with abysmal accuracy and apparently no cooldown requirement. Based on the Mass Effect 1 Codex on Turians, biotics were supposed to be rare and were usually members of elite squads known as Cabals. You would think the fact that Saren was a biotic and likely a former member of a Cabal would have come up at some point during the story.
I know Saren.
Isn't it standard policy to know the enemy when facing off against them is inevitable? Furthermore, there is no mention of Saren being a biotic within the historical narrative that was established by Revelations. In fact, he avoids a one-on-one confrontation with Scar, as facing a Krogan biotic would be suicidal. At the end of the fight, when Saren is almost defeated, he detonates some kind of red nova that has a huge, indefensible area of effect. This is absolute control of the outcome by the narrative. As a footnote, before we move on, if you decide to fight Saren on the Citadel instead of talking him down, he does not use biotics. For this fight and the fight when Sovereign takes control, he uses damping and carnage.
Don't shoot!
In episode 4, we touched on Ranna Thanoptis and Ganto Imnes. Nothing much really happens before this. We come across some lab with a few husks, an Asari nurse or assistant of some type, and a Krogan doctor. Wait, a Krogan what?
When was the last time you saw a Krogan scientist?
Actually, we haven't, because according to Rex, they don't exist. Technically, the Asari refers to the Krogan as doctor, but we all know a scientist is a doctor and a doctor is a scientist, right? Just ask Dr. Conrad Werner, the scientist. So it would seem we may be within the illusion here as well. Time to have a little chat with Sovereign.
You're just a machine, and machines can be broken.
Your words are as empty as your future. I am the vanguard of your destruction. This exchange is over.
After the conversation with Sovereign, Joker comes over the radio and reports that the ship is heading towards Shepard's location. When did Sovereign arrive on Virmire, and why on earth didn't Joker notify Shepard of the Dreadnought's presence the moment he had a visual? Could this explosion have knocked the team out and submerged them into a collective dream? Are we stuck inside the pods below the decking of this chamber? The Solarian FOB is an odd location. It seems well established, but in a poorly hidden and poorly defensible position behind enemy lines. There is little cover and the entrances to the portables face the wide open beach. Despite the significant forces we encounter just to get here, the base shows no signs of previous attacks by the Geth. Neither the Solarian's ship nor any sort of ground transportation is anywhere to be seen. When we meet up with Kirihei, we learn that Saren is creating an army of Krogan. The captain reports that Saren has somehow found a cure for the genophage.
Apparently Saren has discovered a cure for the genophage.
Why would this be necessary for anything beyond creating conflict between Shepard and Rex? When cloning an army, specifically full-grown Krogan males, curing something that affects birth rates would be irrelevant. Cloning bypasses the standard method of reproduction. If you recall, this was the whole point of Grunt's creation in Mass Effect 2. On to the confrontation with Rex. Based on Rex's personality and our previous conversations with him, this confrontation has no validity. There is also a problem with killing Rex if players decide to take that path.
So you'd rather be a
Just a short time ago, Rex expressed absolutely no interest in doing anything for the Krogan. He had tried and failed at altering their path already, and as far as he was concerned, once was enough. Saving his people was the least of his worries. In fact, he claimed to be done with them and would likely never return to Tuchanka. In this scene, Rex jumps 180 degrees out of character, suddenly taking the stance that saving his people from the genophage was his #1 priority. A more appropriate scenario occurs if you happen to be low on squad mates due to lacking Garrus and Liara at this point in the game. Under these conditions, the Rex confrontation simply doesn't happen.
Well, it's your decision, Commander. Go on then. No more talk, Shepard.
Recall your first playthrough or a new game. Up to this point, were you ever able to take down a Krogan warlord with a single shot from a shotgun or pistol and then kill them with a few more? By the time we get to Virmire, Rex is at least as strong as the warlord we face after rescuing Liara on Therum. Even if his suit shields failed, his barrier was not activated and his armor turned to paper. His secondary and tertiary organs would have kicked in. Sustained fire near to the point of weapon overheat would have been needed to finish him off. This should have been a boss fight, if not to properly reflect Krogan's strength, then to at least send Rex off with a dignified roar rather than a gurgly whimper. As an aside, over the course of the trilogy, Krogan get weaker and their blood goes from a greenish yellow to yellowy brown in Mass Effect 2, then finally to human red in Mass Effect 3. Why are Kaidan and Ashley wearing their default armor when we get to the FOB? This can be pretty jarring if one or both happen to be with us on the drive here. What's worse is that for the majority of players, these suits were changed out long ago. Tali, Garrus, and Liara are wearing their default Normandy attire. This is what gets our attention. Why the inconsistency? It would be much easier to handwave this situation if everyone was either in non-combat attire or their original armor. Rex seems to be wearing something similar to his Normandy default, but it's not the same. And unlike the rest of the squad, Ash and Kaidan are in armor long traded or destroyed rather than the blues they wear on the ship. This scene seems intent on calling attention to itself, and does so with intensity not seen since our encounter with Elanos Haliat. It comes across as very intentional. So it looks like Virmire may be fully encompassed within the illusion. Time to head back to the other plot worlds.
Approach control, this is the SSV Normandy, requesting a vector and a berth.
We touched on Noveria in episode 4 and talked about how the information provided to us was some kind of diversion meant for Sovereign. That perhaps the Asari and Rachni were tools of Leviathan. We thought this had a thematic basis in Mass Effect reality and narrative support based on some of the events in Mass Effect 3. But it is wise to be skeptical and always remain vigilant in a quest for the truth. Consider the following. As we have mentioned before, any data within Mass Effect 3 and of course Mass Effect 2 now has to be viewed with the idea that the events are taking place within Shepard's mind. However, it is possible that not all of the illusion or hallucination is constructed solely from Shepard's subconscious. There does seem to be outside influences, perhaps from exposure to Reaper artifacts and their inherent indoctrination effects, influence from Leviathan, or perhaps a bit of both. We are told repeatedly by the narrative that the Rachni were being influenced by an outside force. It was assumed that the Reapers were behind this, but if you have the From Ashes DLC for Mass Effect 3, the story, via Javik, places the onus on the Protheans. To confuse things even more, during the Leviathan DLC, it becomes evident that Leviathan was also trying to control the Rachni. It is here that we began to suspect that the Protheans and Leviathan were possibly one and the same. So we dug deeper. Leviathan uses thralls in the cycles not just to keep hidden, but to study, learn, and even influence the developing species. A Prothean empire made up of different enslaved species with one caste as the alpha sounds exactly like something Leviathan would do. What is Javik? If Mass Effect 3 is an illusion or hallucination, it stands to reason that Javik is a physical manifestation of the cipher Shepard picked up on Feros in Mass Effect 1. This makes much more sense than finding a single functioning 50,000-year-old cryopod. There is also a hint to this if you take Javik with you to Thessia.
It must be the cipher you got back on Feros years ago.
Or it could be the Prothean standing next to you.
Based on the narrative, the Asari were supposed to be the Alpha in our cycle. They may have also been an attempt at ensuring the continuation of a species from one cycle to the next, if even only one survived. But long life and parthenogenesis reproduction, coupled with the ability to transfer memories through melding, could ensure future cycles would have knowledge of the Reapers long before their return from dark space. There is support for this in the Refuse ending of Mass Effect 3, in which the Stargazer has a female voice and the silhouette of an Asari.
Tell the true story of those who came before us.
Are you a survivor from the war?
In the Leviathan DLC, we come to find out Leviathan was trying to usurp the Rachni for some unknown purpose. This later resulted in the Rachni War. It could be that the Rachni hostility towards the galactic community was an unintended consequence of Leviathan meddling. Perhaps they were using the Rachni in this cycle as guard dogs to a relay that led into Leviathan territory, or they were intentionally set upon the galactic community in order to strengthen the unity of the Citadel races and encourage war preparations. All we really have is conjecture. Noveria ends with the death of Benezia and the death or survival of the Rachni Queen based on player choice, for whatever that ends up being worth. Dreams do lack logic, so we'll let both versions of the gigantic Rachni Queen in Mass Effect 3 slide. We have some doubts about the information we garner on Noveria. We really have no way to know if the Rachni is telling the truth or just telling us what we need to hear. Regardless of the motivations from both parties involved, there is no reason to doubt the events themselves. Noveria could well be in the realm of Mass Effect reality. It would seem convergence for Shepard comes at a different point in the story. Time to pack up and head to Feros. This arc ends with the destruction of the Thorian, as Shepard and the squad drop the massive creature down a deep hole under Zoo's Hope. Fighting with Thorian has us contending with creepers and cloned Asari Huntress, while shooting node connections throughout the ruins. The battle results in a convincing enough defeat of the creature. However, given its mind control capabilities, we best be on our guard here. The Thorian is proposed to be more than 50,000 years old. To have this claimed endemic knowledge of the Protheans, it is obviously older. It also survived at least one Reaper culling. If it was capable of surviving all this time, would taking out a half-dozen nodes really kill it? Chatting with Expat, the Volus merchant, and the wards on the Citadel may give us some insight into this. Current data on Feros reports the colony was founded by Exogeni in 2178 and had a total population of 300. Expat reports that this is not the first time Feros was colonized. It had been attempted a number of times before. So what happened during those previous attempts to colonize this place? And why no reports on the discovery of the Thorian before now? Could it be that the other colonies suffered a similar fate as Feros? Could the Thorian have taken over some of the colonists, and over time altered the perceived ability of settling this world? Could the Thorian be a Leviathan? We only have Shepard's subconscious visual perceptions regarding Leviathan's appearance to go on, after all.
Nothing's ever simple, is it?
Perhaps everything that comes after Feros is an elaborate mental fantasy, while their physical body remains cocooned to a wall? Shiala, the Asari Huntress that is cloned by the Thorian and joins the Creepers in the battle against Shepard and Squad, raises a few questions regarding the reality of this situation. She comes out of the Thorian fully clothed and is equipped with a shotgun.
I speak for the old
The reproduction of clothing we can let slide, as it could be organic material that resembles clothing. Given the organic nature of biotics, it may even be possible that the cloning process is sophisticated enough to allow for the ability to be duplicated. However, we draw the line at the shotgun. How would it be possible for the Thorian to create a fully functional organic copy of a weapon consisting of complex moving parts, which happens to include a miniature Mass Effect core? The clone is an obvious clue that the reality of Feros, or at least the confrontation with a Thorian, is in question. However, there is far more supporting evidence that Feros is part of the hallucination in its entirety. This entire planet is covered by a mile-high metropolis. This kind of development would have taken hundreds or perhaps thousands of years, and despite being largely composed of something resembling concrete, portions of the city are remarkably well preserved.
The Protheans left remarkably little behind. It is like someone came along.
Weren't almost
after the
all
Protheans
traces
were
of the
gone
Protheans
and cleansed
scrubbed from the galaxy?
of clues?
According to the narrative at the beginning of Mass Effect 1, the data cache found on Mars and subsequent discovery of the beacon on Eden Prime were rare and of monumental importance. If Prothean ruins and even working Prothean technology as we see on Therum are so readily discovered, why all the fuss over a single beacon? And given the level of working technology on Therum, why wasn't that site heavily guarded by Council military? With Feros looking very much like it resides within Shepard's mind, things get a little puzzling. Noveria, Feros, and Therum can be done in any order. If Noveria and Therum take place in Mass Effect reality, what happens if we do them after Feros? Are they outside the illusion if we do them first, but within it if we do them after? The answer may come from a very odd side mission in the Voyager cluster. Entering the Amazon system triggers a call from Hackett. He alerts Shepard that a probe launched back during the first contact war had just sent a mission complete signal. The issue with this is the probe is nowhere near where it should have been, and it's carrying a nuclear payload. The mission is more or less damage control.
Your grasp of the obvious is inspiring.
We are probably all aware of the main issues surrounding this mission. Elanos claims to be the one who organized the Terminus mercenaries to launch the attack against Elysium. However, this effort was funded by Batarian interests. It is most unlikely that a human would have risen to such a position so quickly, especially in a region of space that doesn't welcome Citadel species. It is also unlikely that a Turian would have been a leader in a prominent mercenary group that called the Terminus home. But given that they have been on the galactic stage a lot longer than we have, it's a little more plausible. Due to the eyepiece Elanos wears, his name, which consists of names from two Turian weapons manufacturers, and his dialogue, which distances himself from humankind, it was believed he was supposed to be a Turian, that he was given a human model by mistake. This explanation is outside of the narrative and under closer scrutiny. It just does not hold up. The issue was also never fixed via patch or DLC. Furthermore, there are two ways to acquire this mission, and the second, via console on the cargo ship at Feros, provides us with some key information that discredits this explanation further. If the model of Elanos was supposed to be Turian, or something else, and he makes mention of your kind, meaning human, it stands to reason that the pirates with him were not supposed to be human either. So why was a shipment of human rations shipped to this location? Turians can't eat human food. If this mission was planned out with a specific non-human species in mind, you'd think the supporting narrative would have been correct. Furthermore, why would a group from the Terminus systems acquire supplies from within the Attican Traverse? The fact that the supposed error was never corrected suggests the oddities of this mission may have been intentional, including the fact that Elanos is not wearing his helmet during the fight on the surface of Agabinium. This also may imply that Shepard is already within the illusion or hallucination. Let's head back to the Citadel and see if we can find our point of convergence. Despite the size of the Mass Effect universe, we are running out of real estate fast. Maybe that rogue AI did take Shepard out before they could shut it
Probability
down.
of detection 100%. Initiating self-destruct protocol.
Crap.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see our troubles are all the
Hacking terminals and acquiring quests that will take us on wondrous trips across the stars creates an amazing feeling of anticipation. From cracking open the mystery of the Keepers, to following a trail that leads you to a rogue AI, to being gifted a trinket that would plant the seed of a deep mystery, the last of which leads you to uncover alien interference with humanity at the dawn of our self-awareness. All these wonders we discover hide a vital truth about this place, and its grandeur and scope of area accessible to the player contributes to this, as does the fact that everyone seems to know who Shepard is. Some even know about the covert mission that just took place on Eden Prime. It is a place of many distractions. The Citadel serves to put us on the path of many meaningless quests intermixed with a few that points us in the direction of our quarry. Let's take a walk back through the primary events of our first visit to the Citadel and see what wonders lie beneath the narrative and story. Just before we depart the station, Shepard meets up with Udina and Anderson. During this exchange, in which the command of the Normandy is passed on to Shepard, two important pieces of information are expressed to us, the player. Shepard is a Spectre. Although they represent humanity in this position, they do not answer to the Alliance or Earth political powers any longer. They answer only to the Council. For all intents and purposes, they are a commander and part of the Alliance military based on former service only, but fall outside that chain of command at present. Of course, this position is made meaningless later in the game, where the Council's interference with Shepard is itself a threat to galactic security, and then they turn to Udina to bring Shepard under control. Mass Effect 2 diminishes this position even further, allowing Shepard to keep the status but restrict operations to the Terminus, where Spectres are not just unwelcome but have absolutely no authority. The player can also choose to have Shepard drop the status altogether. Beyond a few narrative lines and dialogue choices, neither decision results in relevant differences during the course of the second game.
Spectres can do whatever they want, Elias. I can't help you.
The second thing the narrative tells us, via Anderson: don't bother looking for Saren. Why on earth would Anderson say that? Saren is the entire reason we are where we're at in this point in the game. Did Anderson know something we didn't? Perhaps the hunt for Saren was just as irrelevant or meaningless as Shepard's Spectre status. After rescuing Tali, we meet up with Anderson and Udina at the human embassy on the Presidium. Tali plays the recording of Saren. This recording only proves Saren was involved with the events on Eden Prime, in that he has knowledge of the beacon and perhaps the attack. It's circumstantial at best, but the fact that he lied about having any knowledge of the attack is proof enough for the Council to take action against him. To acquire this information, Tali claims she was able to track some Geth to an uncharted world. She then singles one out, disables it, and pulls its core without alerting the others. Aren't Geth in close proximity to one another networked? They are a single entity, after all. After this heroic display of stealth tracking and combat skills, she then made her way to the Citadel and attempted to hand this information over to C-Sec. For reasons unknown to us, she chose to bypass C-Sec headquarters and instead made her way to a satellite office on the Presidium, where she was turned away. As she was leaving, she was nearly killed by the mercenaries hired by Saren. Tali escaped the assault, but not unscathed. She headed to the wards and sought out medical assistance. If we scrutinize Tali's story too closely, it begins to show some serious cracks. Geth had not been seen beyond the Veil for hundreds of years. How is it that she just happened upon this squad in the vastness of space? There isn't even mention of her alerting the flotilla to this discovery, even after arriving on the Citadel. One would expect that to be her first priority. In fact, it is unknown if she even attempted to mention their involvement to C-Sec when she tried to give them the data. Most Quarians on pilgrimage are poor. It seems likely she didn't have her own transportation. Perhaps she was avoiding her own ship to prevent being caught or killed by Saren's minions. But given what we have learned about the Quarians over the course of the trilogy, the value they place on ships, the nature of the pilgrimage, pokes many holes in Tali's story. If she was hitchhiking, it's unlikely any captain would have diverted course to follow Geth. They would have immediately alerted Council authorities that Geth had been spotted in Citadel space. Even if we let these things slide, the conversation between Benezia and Saren took place after the attack on Eden Prime. So, while the Normandy was on the 16-hour journey to the Citadel, Tali tracked a squad of Geth to an uncharted world, stalked and disabled one, removed its memory core, headed to the Citadel, talked to a C-Sec agent on the Presidium, got shot, got treated, and then set up a meeting with Fist and further arranged a meeting with the Shadow Broker, all before we even arrived on the Citadel? If you think her story is on shaky ground right now, just wait a few minutes.
Saren had assassins after you?
Right. I disabled the Geth and found that recording that proved he was working with the Reapers. I went to Ilium and tried to inform the authorities, but Saren's mercenaries attacked me. I barely escaped. I stowed away on a Thorian freighter and came out here. I thought I was safe.
Wait, what?
Tracking back further, before we can advance the story and begin our search for Saren, we need to prove to the Council that he was involved with the attack on Eden Prime, and also acquire the necessary authority to hunt a Spectre. If we stay on task and avoid the plethora of distractions on the Citadel, we can get to the heart of the matter quite quickly. We all have our specific style of play, but on the very first playthrough it is highly likely we wanted to fill all those character silhouettes in the squad screen as quickly as possible. This leads us to Garrus and Dr. Michelle, perhaps the most important NPC we come across, very early into the game.
Who are you?
Let her go.
After the beacon is destroyed on Eden Prime, Shepard is presumably evacuated to the Normandy for medical attention. When Shepard awakes, 15 hours have passed. Within 20 to 30 minutes we are on the Citadel, being debriefed by Udina. Shortly after this we are free to begin our quest to track down proof that Saren was involved with the incident on Eden Prime. If we follow the path of least resistance, let's say we head to the tower, then immediately to Korra's den and search for Garrus, and then on to the medical clinic and the wards. Let's say for our very first playthrough, this takes about 2 more hours. After the showdown in the clinic, about 17 hours had passed in the Mass Effect universe. It is here we learn that Aquarian has data that can aid us in our task of proving Saren a traitor. An incredibly important clue is revealed at this very moment in the game, and it has to do with time.
A few days ago, Aquarian came by my office. She'd been shot.
Dr. Michelle says that Tali came to see her a few days ago. Now, a few can mean 3 or more, but is inevitably a small number. For argument's sake, let's say Tali was here at the minimal few, 3 days ago. Citadel days are 20 hours long. It's been less than 1 Citadel day since the beacon exploded on Eden Prime, injuring Shepard and beginning the hunt for Saren. So Tali had been on the Citadel with evidence of Saren's betrayal 2 full days before the Normandy even arrived at Eden Prime? It is possible Saren and Sovereign had been on this hunt and planned the attack on Eden Prime days or even weeks ago. However, the problem lies with the content of Tali's proof. How did she have a recording of a conversation between Saren and Asari that clearly takes place after the attack on Eden Prime, 2 full days before that attack even happened?
And now, everything that followed this exact moment in the trilogy begins to come into focus and unravel simultaneously. The mystery of Shepard's fate and the true intentions of Saren and Sovereign are just the tip of the iceberg. We are not simply going to leave things off here. We have one more stop to make before we head back to where it all began. As we traveled back through the events of Mass Effect 1, we touched on parts of the story that did not add up, or narrative and exposition that countered lore established earlier in the game. Mako teleporting onto the Citadel, Sovereign and the Geth's entrance to the Serpent Nebula, Shiala's clones, and Tali's broken timeline.
You have come too far.
Given we are dealing with fiction within fiction here, it may be best to look at the entire Mass Effect story as strictly chronological based on release dates. Revelations comes first, then Mass Effect 1. The DLCs, books, comics, and other narrative media follow in the order in which they were released. They serve to retroactively establish lore, and in the process, manipulate and sometimes slant perception of things we experience in the Mass Effect game narrative. This becomes exceedingly obvious in Deception. Now it's time to take a look at a few things within the game that are contradicted by humanity's short history within the Mass Effect universe, a slice of which is presented to us in Mass Effect Revelations. Kaylee Sanders is a prominent character in this novel. We are graced with her presence in Mass Effect 3 during the mission to save the students of the Grissom Academy. There is a very minor issue with the Kaylee we meet in the game, compared to the one presented in the book. Kaylee Sanders has light brown eyes, not blue. It may be subtle, but it's just another small piece of an ever-growing pile of data that supports our conclusion regarding Mass Effect 3. Prothean is an arbitrary name given to the aliens that built the research facility on Mars. It was not some direct translation of their actual name. It is also unlikely this name was used by other Citadel species, unless talking directly to a human about them, thanks to translators. The actual species' identity seemed to be a mystery, despite the fact that the language was cracked less than a year after the Mars research facility was discovered. If humanity had been able to crack the language over 30 years ago, surely the Asari, who had discovered the Citadel over 2,700 years ago, had mastered it. Given Liara was a Prothean expert, she would not have needed something like a cipher to understand the written or spoken language. And after nearly 3 centuries, it's likely the Omnitool translation program would have included the Prothean language. According to Anderson's encounter with a Volus bartender at Cora's Den in 2159, they do not wear full environmental suits. Volus wear breather masks to compensate for a thin atmosphere on the Citadel compared to that of their homeworld, not because they breathe different gases than the rest of the Citadel species. There are several dozen mass relays within the Serpent Nebula in the vicinity of the Citadel, not just one. In addition to this, a ring of discharge stations lay between the station and the relays so that ships can discharge their engine cores before entering a holding pattern while they await docking clearance from Citadel control. All relay roads lead to the Citadel. It is the busiest place in the galaxy. Regardless of the importance of a given ship and crew, everyone has to wait their turn to dock. Even military vessels, which are given priority, have to wait in line. Founded in 2160, Elysium was one of the Alliance's oldest colonies. It was located near another nexus of primary and secondary relays. It is a major commerce hub and a main stop on the Citadel's intergalactic public transportation system. In 2165, Elysium boasted a population of just over 1 million thanks to its natural resources and location within the Verge. Only half the population was human. According to the planetary data, the population grew to just over 8 million over the next 18 years. Now this is realistic. Remember Job? Distant from the Verge and other colonies in the Terminus, with only a single relay in the system, grew to 21 million in 15 years. Only a healthy Krogan species could hope to reach these numbers. According to Mass Effect Revelations, towards the end of 2149, massive terraforming projects had already started to transform the moon into an inhabitable environment. In the 34 years that followed, it is very likely that most of the surface would have been covered by an ultra-modern metropolis, lush vegetation, and man-made lakes. The moon we are presented with in Mass Effect 1 during the mission to quell a rogue AI was barren, desolate, and had no hint of an atmosphere or evidence of terraforming. Where it all began. Digging into Eden Prime, Manuel, Saren, the origins of the beacon would take the better part of an entire episode, so we'll touch on these things only briefly. The evidence for our conclusions comes from the game narrative, a combination of Mass Effect universe reality bleed-through and face value exposition, and it's a very tangled web. First, Eden Prime takes place within the Mass Effect universe reality. Everything from the moment Shepard wakes up on the Normandy post-beacon vision takes place within the commander's mind. The last thing we see before reality drops away and fantasy takes over is a cutscene on board Sovereign. If you pay close attention to Saren as he reacts to the news that a human used the beacon, you can see that the ship and Saren are lighting up in unison. Looking further back, when Saren assassinates Nihilus, you can already see the intense blue glow of circuitry, metal jaw, and Geth arm. Tubes are also running right out of the Thorian skull into the body armor. Saren is to Sovereign as EDI is to the Normandy in Mass Effect 3, an automaton to be controlled. It is very likely the Saren we know from Revelations is long gone, as is the threat of coup against the Citadel species he once posed. Now the threat is much worse. Back on Virmire at the Solarian FOB, we found it odd that Kaidan and Ashley were in their default armor, while the rest of the squad was there in Normandy attire. There may be an explanation for this. If Shepard never left Eden Prime, if they were in a local hospital or had been moved to a shelter while awaiting evac, their squad would still be in the same armor. Shepard's subconscious may be allowing some reality to bleed through, seeing Kaidan and Ashley as they really are. Some may argue that this armor would be different on a second playthrough, however, only the first playthrough of each game is valid, especially Mass Effect 1. Replays and New Game Plus are like reliving the dream. Some minor things can be altered, but in the greater scheme of things, nothing really changes. The Crazy Doctor, yet another NPC of paramount importance. How many of us brushed Manuel off as a crazy rambling lunatic? How many recalled his words as we encountered Sovereign on Virmire, entered into the later stages of Mass Effect 2, or witnessed the Reapers touch down on Earth in the opening of Mass Effect 3?
Is it madness to see the future?
Although the following is conjecture based on his mental state and narrative, we believe that Manuel had either came in close contact or direct contact with the beacon, and as a defensive mechanism, it destroyed his mind with a single thought. It was implied by Dr. Warren that he was already a little unstable. Could this have saved him to some degree? It is possible that the beacon we find on Eden Prime is one of the shards Leviathan speaks of in the DLC, a device they use to see out into the galaxy, watching as a cycle unfolds, something that could be used to trace back to its origin, track its creators. These shards may be used to enthrall those in close proximity, providing Leviathan with the means to study the current cycle, using the unsuspecting sapients to gather data and conduct research on the species while leaving no one the wiser, and even cover their tracks if necessary. Because Manuel's mind was wired a little differently than most humans, perhaps this gave him immunity to the influence of the beacon, requiring a defense mechanism to eliminate him as a threat. Who would trust the ravings of a madman, after all?
Oh my god!
Shepard may also represent a small percentage of humanity that is immune to the influences of the beacon. It is possible that they are not only capable of resisting enthrallment, but the secondary defense that would turn a person into a raving fool. Regardless of the challenges placed before them within the illusion, they find a way to push forward, going around the Council, finding Ilos, defeating Saren and then Sovereign's avatar, destroying the Dreadnought itself with a tiny ship, through sheer will. This is followed by being killed and pushing their way back to life, defying the odds to take on an entire puppeted species at all costs, and surviving to tell about it. James Vega was put through a similar test. We believe he and Steve may be another incident of bleed-through from reality, perhaps part of the search and rescue forces sent to Eden Prime to evac the Normandy ground team that got caught up in the beacon's influence. Given James's adventure on Fel Prime, a colony that cannot actually exist, it seems likely that he also has the ability to resist enthrallment. However, he was just not strong enough to hang on to his sanity. The events were just too much for him to take. At the end of Paragon Lost, leading into the opening of Mass Effect 3, their illusions became intertwined, and Shepard's will lifts him up and empowers him to push on as they complete the final chapter of their crucible together. The breath scene also seems to take place in reality, but it is a very brief moment of awareness rather than a bleed-through. Perhaps the result of Sovereign returned to the planet in an attempt to finish Shepard off, an attempt that apparently failed. This scene is followed by a key event through Transmedia Narrative for those who have the Datapad app. But before we look at that, let's take a closer look at the breath scene. One of the main reasons we were looking for a point of convergence is this scene. Every player, and by extension every Shepard, is in the same place at the same time before and after this scene. We know it's not at the spaceport by the beacon, despite the fact that all Shepards could be wearing Onyx armor. There is still a possibility that any of us who found better armor on our very first playthrough changed. The simple fact is, Shepard is not wearing armor at all. They are in their blues. This is the only way to explain the N7 tags being visible. The collar on the hard suit would not allow for the tags to be visible unless the entire front by the neckline was ripped off. At some point after the beacon explosion, but before the second attack, Shepard's armor had been removed. This makes a lot of sense if the commander had been moved to a local medical facility. At some point, presumably after Shepard and Squad are extracted from Eden Prime, Shepard is under medical isolation. Because this message arrives after a full playthrough of Mass Effect 3, and so after the breath scene, we assume it takes place after a failed attempt to eliminate them. There is one more event that can be considered bleed-through that takes place during the Citadel DLC, but it is limited to only those Shepherds who have the Spacer background.
It has. I just felt I needed to... I think about you every day. I try not to worry. The other day, I was remembering the bedtime stories we used to make up. You had your own ship and crew. The stories were always filled with adventure and danger.
Oh, yeah. Haven't thought about that in a while.
Me neither. Oh, you'd always swoop in to punish the bad guys to save the day. So, there you are. Even when you were little, you dreamed of the life you have.
Doesn't this sound like something a worried mother would say while sitting at the bedside of their comatose child? The veil of this dream or hallucination has been shattered. There was no chase, no race to the conduit, no death and resurrection, no collectors, and no war with the Reapers. And most importantly, no red, green, or blue endings to canonize. Now, BioWare's stance regarding the ending of Mass Effect 3 can truly come into focus. The writers were not backed into any corners. There was no hole from which to dig themselves out of. But there is one hell of a story left to tell, and many, many questions to be answered.
You better make damn sure this nightmare was worth all the pain.